Andreas,
Hey,
how are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. How's the sound and everything?
It's good, it's good. I was just doing a league with Eureka and a Midland on Doomsday. We were having a little fun Doomsday meme
Oh,
league.
oh, sick.
It was, they didn't like my keep sometimes, and it turns out I made more mistakes than turns. But that's fine. Doomsday is, I'll give myself that one on Doomsday. I think
So,
that,
so he was he on a call, like on the call with you?
yeah, we weren't like doing like a coaching. It was mostly just like a backseat meme
Yeah,
stream
sure.
with bourbon.
Is there anything to any footage you want to grab from that one, or?
Oh no, no, no.
Okay.
That was a uh bourbon fueled interesting
Yeah,
puppet. Marcia says more like puppeteering, which is a fair point. But
yeah,
how have you been?
definitely.
How have you been? How's life? I saw you did well in the challenge. One of the challenges recently.
Yeah, I jammed some mono red to good success. I had fun changing up the pace a little bit. Sometimes that's what you need. That's what you need in life to reignite some fire, and
Mm-hmm.
it was fun. It was yeah, magic is fun in all forms. So I like to keep myself sharp. Sometimes cast Big Brain Ponder. Sometimes jam Big Brain Blood Moon.
The Big Brain Blood Moon. The my one of my most hated cards in all of Magic the Gathering. I hate Blood Moon. Blood Moon and Ring are the two cards that no matter what happens, I will always despise.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, the if I ever had a controlling share of Wizards of the Coast, uh, I would ban Blood Moon in a heartbeat and match the
yeah,
moon. I think I hate that card so much. I play only greedy color decks in modern. I played Omnath, I play Goryo's, I play decks that
yeah.
just cannot beat a Blood Moon, and I absolutely despise that card.
It's interesting how just as a thought experiment, because obviously you're talking out of like subjective. Oh, this music is not what I
Yeah,
enjoy.
yeah.
Hey, and then other people are like, oh, but I love this music. It's more like how would Magic look without it? I think it's like secretly keeps a lot of stuff in check, and it's kind of like Wasteland in a way. I think.
The I think Wasteland is I get much less angry. I get angry about Wasteland when I get Wastelanded three times and I lose the game when I Wasteland my opponent three times and they just draw out of it. I'm like, this is bullshit, man.
Yeah, it's yeah. There's some. I feel like a lot of legacy players are chasing some utopia of, we all get to pass the turn with mana and cast the like we have time to cast brainstorm. We don't have to worry about bowmasters, and we can play four colors and all the fun cards. I don't know. It seems like it's chasing something that will never
Yeah.
exist, and probably
No,
would have
no.
its own flaws as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I know people have thought done that like thought experiment of what would Legacy look like without the modern horizons and the universes beyond. And I
Yeah.
know a lot of people came out of that saying we think it would just be combo only. But I don't know. Obviously, no one's ever dove into that format just because a lot of people have like this vitriol towards Modern Horizons,
Yeah,
which
that's true.
fair
Kind of a
enough.
narrative, and it's easy
Yeah,
to jump on that
yeah.
bandwagon, and without actually thinking it through, I think it's very complex.
I mean,
Um,
there is something to be said about how every blue deck that isn't Delver starts with four Tameo now or three Tameo, and it's kind of like Modern Horizons has homogenized deck building in a way because the most powerful things are all in this are this like it used to be like in 2012 when we had all these various blue archetypes. Like you had Delver, you had Shardless Bug, you had Canadian Threshold, like Nimble Mongoose, Tarmogoyf, you had Rug Delver, you had traditional Grixis Delver, you had Miracles, like you had all these like flavors of blue decks that were all good, and they all had very varying threats, and the way they built their decks was very different. Like Shardless Bug was very different than like Rug Delver, which was not super different to like Canadian Threshold, but noticeably different. And then you had Grixis Delver with like Baleful Strikes and True Name Nemesis. And so there was a lot of different threats and ways to approach. And now it kind of seems like every Delver deck is going to have Delver, DRC, and then whatever else, and Murktide, because those are the three best threats you can play. Every not Delver blue deck that isn't a combo is going to run Tameo, and then if you're in black, you're going to run Bowmaster. Maybe you'll run Dothy. And it's just kind of like it's homogenized deck building in a way that I'm not the biggest fan of someone who enjoys the deck building aspect. But I think from a raw balance and like skill testing point of view, I think all these cards add a lot. It's just from a
yeah.
deck building point of view, I think it's pretty boring.
Yeah, it's a cool observation. I remember I did some content with Bosch and Roll a few months ago where we basically played old decks.
Hmm.
We did play our Rock Delvers of the world, the Stone Blades of the world, the
Hmm.
old school bad sneak attack decks with freaking Woodfall Primus before Atrax and uh, Gristlebrand. And I think we talked a little bit about just how back then we couldn't basically tell, well, is Shardless Bug a tier 1 deck or is it just a tier 2 deck that good players pick up and do well with? And like the stats were a lot more flawed back then. So
Hmm.
maybe if we apply the work people put in today, then maybe there wouldn't actually be that amount of playable decks that you just mentioned. Maybe you were just a jerk if you didn't register miracles or you didn't register, 4-color Deathrite control or whatever the case may be. But back then we kind of played it by ear a lot more, I would say. So there's also that to it, like how
See,
people approach the game.
I think that's true. I think on average players have gotten better, but I think there's also something to be said about specifically Legacy. I'll talk about specifically Legacy. Back when Legacy was a supported format by WotC, because now Legacy is officially not supported at all, right? Like
The Legacy is a path to the Mox, which is Wizard sponsored. They paid out my prize money last spring, but yeah, you're right. It's very niche.
yeah, yeah. So it's not, we don't have GPs, right? Like you can't
Yeah,
get an RC invite playing Legacy anymore. Um, and these have all been like relatively recent changes in over the course of like history of Legacy, over the course of like extended in
yeah,
1.5. And so it's like people, I think also so it's like to your point, right? Like we weren't as good as players. Like people still
yeah.
like,
We had more fun with it. Treated it less like a sport. All of that
yeah.
jazz, right?
Yeah, but now it's this weird where it's like Legacy is specifically that, but also back then because we had GPs. Because I actually talked to Vashtrel about the same thing once, and he said the innovation of Death Shadow, Street Wraith, and Reanimate came out because of a GP testing, and like what would the format look like if
Yeah,
we had more major events. Like Mystic Forge was the breakout deck of Eternal Weekend NA, and
yeah.
I personally, not to like sell myself as some kind of messiah, but I did say in early June that if Grief gets banned, I think any deck that can play Bauble into Ring will run amok, and I was right.
Yeah,
I would argue that Mystic Forge was truly the best deck in the format. Notably because of the Modern Horizons 3 cards, Kozilek's Command and Vexing Bauble, and honestly, the Fleshraker and Saga and Kozilek's Command, I think were the reasons why that deck was so over the top, was because traditionally before all this, if you null routed this deck, they literally had maybe 1 or 2 ways to kill it, and that's
yeah.
it. Like they could not busy to the point where I was running into a ton of Mystic Forge when I was on Rhinos like 2-3 years ago, and I actually put in Collector Roofs so that I could cascade into Collector Roofs because it was such a free way to win that matchup.
Yeah,
And they only had sorcery speed removal, so I had all my fonts, all my forces, and I would just get there with a single Collector Roof. But obviously,
yeah.
Kozilek's
That's true.
Command and Flush
Yeah,
Raker have
this
eliminated
is a
that.
great. This is actually a great point that I also thought about when we chat a little bit about another topic. Maybe that's a topic for next time.
Hmm.
The fact I wanted to kind of set the table of. So you're talking about GPs as basically a motivation to go deep into the tank and
Yeah.
build, like, put hard work into a deck. And that's something that I wanted to talk a little bit about next time. You mentioned something about your ability to play on stream. You talked a little bit about some speed things. You
Yeah.
talked a little bit about some mistakes and stuff like that. And that's basically going to be a conversation about what's your purpose. Is your purpose to win as many matches as possible? Is your purpose to make as entertaining uh, content as possible? What is your purpose? And then you kind of define it and go through those branches. And once you kind of answer that, you'll get to a point where what is actually the most important thing. Because I definitely know players who will take 8 minutes with a very, very important decision in a game, and that would probably not make the best, content, right? So there's
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
mixed agendas when it comes to that, and that's also true for tournaments. Are you playing to beat your local guys every Wednesday at the local store? Are you
Hmm.
playing to qualify for the PT via the showcase? Are you trying to 5-0 some leagues? Like, what's your purpose of going deep into Legacy, right? So that's a lot of the stuff that I wanted to talk about next time.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I have a
if
lot
I
I
can
can say there too.
Yeah, for sure. But for today, we kind of settled on what sprung out of me visiting your stream earlier. Well, that would be last week, and you had an interesting game where you're playing a blue-based deck. You play against Mono Red Prison, and we have an opening hand with different avenues. Let's put it that way. And I kind of wanted to unpack that scenario because that scenario was my instinct wanted one thing, your instinct wanted another thing. Then we both saw how it played out, and then we kind of have to separate ourselves from what happened and what did we knew at the time, and how can we play the best percentages to learn from it, basically. So I wanted to learn a lot from that scenario, and without caring too much about what actually happened, because that's not going to prove anything, right? For me, it's about the theory, and if that is something we do at random or something we draw from, proper research, good experiences, good vision on how does this game play out. So I actually really wanted to get into some demo review today and maybe demonstrate, try and inspire with how I would approach stuff like that.
Yeah. So let me go ahead and I'll share my screen because I have it pulled up here. So let me pull this over here.
The shoot the sheriff joke. I hope you appreciated that one.
What's his? I know the name, but I can't remember his.
I think it's Nimblest Mongoose.
Oh, okay. Wait, how does he know me again?
He doesn't know you. It was a picture he sent me for some upcoming secret stuff that I can't talk about. But I thought about you already. He wanted me to use that picture, and then I thought, shoot the sheriff. Huh? That reminds me of something.
Oh, I remember now. That was so bad, man. I remember you said, "Oh, you can't shoot the sheriff the broadside." Now I get it, and I was like, "Oh my fucking god." That was we could have played that turn better, but we'll skip that game one, just because I think that play alone defined a lot of that game, because it totally warped how I played that when I realized I couldn't shoot the sheriff or broadside, and I think that game would have been very different if I just played it the other way around.
Yeah, I remember that as well, and it comes down to, well, we might as well, like, if for the viewers here, basically say that shoot the sheriff versus go for the throat versus fell is a ongoing conversation for fair demure mages, I will say. Which one do you put in your deck? Do you want to be, more naked against the Dreadnought? Do you want to be more naked against, like, Bombardier, Dottie Walker, Brazen Borrower? Do you want sorcery speed, like, that can kill anything? And it's just ongoing, I like go for the throat personally, but only a tiny bit more than the others. It's really close.
When I was on Blue-Black Stiflenaught, that deck actually got a little popular. I saw quite a few other people playing it as like my precursor to Esper. I was running Bitter Triumph because Karn was everywhere. Because that was during the cast of the Forge event, so Karn is everywhere. And I also realized that I can't beat Teferi, so just having a main deck answer to Teferi. Because in blue-white, it's much less of a big deal because you have Doorkeeper Thrall, and Doorkeeper Thrall is actually really good against Teferi, only because you can flash in Doorkeeper Thrall, or if you have a second Doorkeeper Thrall, it's usually pretty plentiful. And it was very relevant because I had frogs in that deck too, in blue-black. But in Esper, it's, I don't know for what reason. If it's Doorkeeper Thrall, just having creatures that just stick around because they don't really get rid of them. Anyway, long story short, blue-black, I had a lot more issues with Teferi, like to the point where I would just lose the game, and the only decks that played Teferi was Nadu, and my health is usually pretty irrelevant against Nadu, so I was like, Bitter Triumph seems like a great one here because my health is very relevant. It hits everything and it hits Planeswalkers, so I'm actually partial to Bitter Triumph in any deck where maybe the discard could be positive, or in a meta where your health isn't being pressured. Against Delver, I don't think I would ever run Bitter Triumph now that Delver is back in the meta, because that deck actually kills you, but back in that meta, no decks were actually killing you.
Yeah, great call about the speed of the format also dictating whether life loss is viable or not. That evaluation is always changing. I have not played Fell. I really wanted the instant speed always, but
I tried that too for a bit.
Yeah, I mean, they can all be great in different scenarios. I figured sorcery speed against Bombardier was kind of not really making sense, so I ended up, swapping between go for the throat and shoot the sheriff. But here's the game at hand. So I can maybe just explain from my perspective what I feel like was going on here. So you were playing your your
Bug
Sultai
deck.
deck. Yep, your Sultai deck, and you're up against Mono Red Prison. I believe you lose game 1, so you're on the play. You make your sideboarding here with Consigned, Blue Blast, maybe, you know, cutting some Dazes and Thoughtseizes, and what do I know. You kind of set up your deck here to be better against their deck. And then you open this hand with a little bit of conflict when it comes to what to do turn 1. You do have a Force of Will to make up for it. A little bit of conflict when it comes to what to fetch. If we go for basics, that Abrupt Decay is not looking good. If we don't go for basics, you know, we actually care about Blood Moon. So lots of choices here, and I found that super interesting. I just had, you know, your stream on the other monitor, but this really caught my eye, and then maybe you can kind of take it from here. What do you think when you open up a hand like this against Mono Red?
I actually talked about this play to a lot of people, and it was 50-50 on what people said you should do here, actually.
Yeah, okay, I'm curious here. So let's imagine I'm some stranger you trust that hasn't seen this game. Let me insert that one, because I am technically a stranger that you trust to some extent. So let's just imagine I'm someone in your network. I didn't see this game. How do you like lay it out to them? Let's just imagine you send a screenshot, you attach a lot of words, do you just go, what's the play? Enter.
I would be like, what's the play against Mono Red? What do you do turn 1? That's what I asked, and I sent the hand.
Okay.
And I still think, like, obviously in hindsight, it was correct to... Okay, so I won't say what actually happened. What I did was I fetched Basic Island on Polluted Delta and played Tamiyo.
Yeah, so explain that play.
So obviously,
advantages of that play, rather.
So I want to get my basics under me so that I don't have to worry about a Blood Moon as much. I do have Abrupt Decay in hand, which does make things a little awkward if I get Basic Island, because I don't really have a great path to victory. I know they're on Mono Red. And Mono Red is one of those decks where, like, it's a very one-dimensional deck. So I already kind of know what they're doing. They kept 7, which is already bad for me, because if Mono Red keeps 7, it means their hand is pretty correct.
I remember it as they mulligan to 6.
Oh, do they mulligan to 6?
I remember it like that, so I guess we just see. But yeah, so I guess we keep our hand no matter what. Then we see what the opponent does, and then we make our play, right? So maybe you can let it go until the opponent makes their mulligan decision. And this is where the details can come in, right? So theoretically, your play can change from how many cards your opponent has in the starting hand, right?
Yeah.
That could be some tiebreaker in theory. But yeah, let's see. I'm relatively sure they go to 6 cards here.
Yeah, they mulled to 6.
Opponent mulligans to 6. So, well, first of all, let's talk a little bit about what do you know about the Mono Red deck? Like, what does their 6-card hand look like? Do they make any sideboard adjustments? What do you expect here?
So they see I was on bug cards. So Blood Moon is the best card in their deck. It just wins the game if it resolves game 1, and most likely wins. Not always. I did build the deck in such a way that I could fight through it with the Basic Swamp.
Yeah.
That's actually why Basic Swamp is in the deck, is so I could run Basics. That's why Uro isn't in the deck, is so I could run Basics, because of Mono Red specifically. So what I know about the deck is they all like every Mono Red list, even if they're like slightly different, they all do the same thing. They're trying to put lock piece, threat, ring to refresh, and the threats are relatively the same thing. Like the difference between a Pyroglyph and a Goblin Bombardier doesn't really matter when they have a Chalice or a Blood Moon in play, right? Like it doesn't actually matter. They could play. I actually asked this question once: if Moonstompy was still running Rakdos Pit Dragon, how much worse would the win rate be? And the general consensus was not that much, because at the end of the day, once your lock piece is in play, like that's all you need.
Yeah, I think that the amount of games you win by just going those 2 cards you mentioned and just randomly race some decks. That's actually quite a big chunk of games these days, especially against decks that don't care about the hate pieces, which are kind of plenty. But yeah, that's another talk. So you're basically saying that you expect them to go lock piece, and you kind of have to. Well, with that logic, you kind of have to, let's call it, weather the storm against that deck, right?
Yeah. Like if you can survive the first 2 turns without a lock piece and no threat, your win rate's probably 80%.
Yeah, so there's something to be said about the focus on turn 1 through 3. Would you agree about that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and I agree about that one.
So now that I think about it, though, now that we actually talked it through, I now see why you do the play that you do. Because this deck is a deck that's running Chrome Mox and Simian Spirit Guide, it's going to 2-for-1 itself a lot in hopes that the 2-for-1 gives them virtual card advantage via the lock piece. And if we can avoid that for the first couple turns, we're in a really good spot. So what I end up doing here is I fetch Basic Island on Tamio. And the reason I do that is because if I can get this Tamio in play, I'm hoping I can start drawing cards. I have Forcible to stop whatever they do. I don't think they have any good answers to Tamio in their deck because I don't think they might be on 2 to 3 Red Blasts, maybe. And I don't think Che Martino's list was on Red Blasts. So it's like they don't really have a good answer to Tamio. No, obviously we'll see what happens.
So let me add some more context to what you do here. So you're also saying that they don't have a good answer to Tamio, the Red Blast is kind of niche because of the conflict with Chalice of the Void these days. After the deck moves away from Vexing Bubble, I totally agree about that. And if they Fury that card, that's kind of, that's fine. Then you have a 1-mana him to Torag all of a sudden. That's also fine, right? So you're basically saying, also we have to mention that your play is only on the table because we have a Force Will in our hand.
Exactly.
My biggest concern is that they go something turn 1 that we have to force, and then we have to pick between pitching Consign or Blue Blast, both of which are better than the other in some cases, but you don't know which one is going to be better. Are you going to lose to Blood Moon turn 2, or you're going to lose to One Ring turn 2? You would then just make a kind of random decision on what to pitch. So I'm actually worried about them forcing you to force turn 1, and then you have to play the roulette on which 1-mana card to keep. That's my biggest concern actually about what's going on here with going turn 1 Tamio, because I would rather weather the storm that, like we talked about. We know that Consign and Blue Blast and Force of Will, those two cards, the Consign and the Blue Blast, they have their turn 1 play covered 100% of the time. Then the counter argument is, but then what if they have like a slow hand, or they have like back to back to back, and then you just don't get anywhere, where the Tamio would have spiraled some card advantage. What can happen in the meantime? And that's totally valid. Then it comes down to what's the most likely to happen and what would be the most backbreaking.
Yeah.
We've talked a little bit about this theme before, where it's what's the frequency of something happening versus how devastating is it when it happens. So sometimes we go for the math play, sometimes we go for the let's dodge the worst case scenario. And this decision is very close, but let's say the Abrupt Decay was like a blank piece of cardboard that was blue. Then I like your play. Like, it's that close. It's simply because I don't like the decision of pitching either Consign nor Blue Blast if I have to turn 1. Then I just feel like it's random what's going to happen if I lose to One Ring or Blood Moon from there.
Right. That makes sense.
That's a lot of words to basically say that this is a very close decision. And I also don't want to say that, you made a mistake. Like, no, for sure not. You made a judgment call.
The other thing, too, why I like the Tamio play is because I want to start drawing cards. Because I have 2 basics, I'm already pretty certain I'm getting the basic here, and I have Abrupt Decay. I really want to get to another land so that if they play a Chalice, I just have the Abrupt Decay.
So that is a way to actually beat some of the stuff you... So basically, let me put it like this. If you go turn 1 Tamio, they're going to turn 1 Ancient Tomb Chalice. Do you let it resolve?
If I go turn 1 Tamio and they go Ancient Tomb Chalice, so I let it resolve?
Yeah.
I'd let it resolve.
Okay,
because
so that's also part of it.
Because I have Force Blue card to counter anything they do, and if they play anything with like a trigger, I can just replicate Consign. And if they don't do anything,
or One Ring, right?
Yeah, or One Ring, and I can just replicate Consign, or I can counter One Ring, or I can just draw a card. Because
so that is also a very good tiebreaker of your play, that you're actually willing to let Chalice resolve, because Tamio gets you into your deck and you have an Abrupt Decay, and all you need is a green source from there to deal with it. That's definitely a let's say a pro of your line, because if you told me, if they play turn 1 Chalice, I force it, then it would be kind of conflicting with each other, right? But you're actually willing to let that one resolve, and I think that's a great overview to have. If you had that in the moment, maybe you had it like on instinct, But it's that deep. The evaluation of how to sequence here is that deep. You need to go multiple turns down the road. What would happen? What am I willing to let resolve? What am I willing to force? And that can kind of add to your judgment about this hand. So
Yeah.
that makes it even closer to me that you want to let the challenge resolve and bang on a green source before it's too late.
I have a lot of lands in the deck, right? 'Cause
Yeah,
I'm a lone wasteland pile. Like, it's really high likelihood, especially if I'm drawing 2 cards a turn, that I get to a green source. Because the thing is, if they play Chalice, I'm happy to just pitch the Blue Blast of Force, and I still have interaction via Consign, and I'm drawing cards via Tamiyo. And I have my islands, I have my 2 basics under me for Blood Moon purposes, so I really, like, the Blue Blast isn't as valuable when I already have my basics.
Yeah, and then of course we get into, we can die to Bombardiers and Pyroglyphs and Fables and all of that, and yeah, it's going to be tough because they can outfare us as well. We're talking about the pit dragon and Arc Slogger versus the new threat suit. They can outfare us as well, pound for pound. I've played a bunch of mono red, and that's something you just sometimes jam some quality threats and kill your opponent who mulliganed or forced or what. The tables can turn in a way where sometimes you want to exploit the red deck for being this. Pitch this to Chrome Mox, mulligan here, Spirit Guide there, kill our land, City Traders. But that can also be the case for the blue deck, where, let's say with a Chalice in play, all your Wonders are bad. If you flood out, that's bad. Like, the mono red deck can also take advantage. So this is actually a very good showcase of a situation that is not easy at all, and both can backfire. You can give up on free card advantage by slow rolling the Tamiyo. You can get blown out by playing it out. So yeah, let's kind of roll the footage here. I think we covered most things. So what's important here is the contents of your own deck, the content of the opponent's deck, and your kind of experience and your view on how does this play out on average, right? What's the sense of urgency? Am I super scared about, like, my biggest point is if they play something turn 1 I need to force. That's my biggest fear with this hand.
Yeah.
Or biggest, focus point. And it looked like your biggest focus point was getting the ball rolling and taking advantage of being a, let's say, normal deck compared to a stompy deck. And it is very tempting to get, Tamiyo going, turn 2, cycle your clue, and, spiral your kind of snowball-y card advantage card here. I don't blame you at all. This was very, 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 very complicated.
So they actually have a really interesting start here, where they kind of vomit their hand, because they actually end up furying my Tamiyo, and I think Chain My Tamiyo is like triple queuing. So we spent a lot of time just waiting for him.
Yeah, that definitely. So back to my original point of my opponent on a mulligan. If they decide to 2-for-1 themselves to kill Tamiyo, I'm very happy with that exchange, and then we kind of play from there. The decision then, what to pitch to force a will, is very interesting. If they end up making a good play turn 1, which I remember it as such.
They went pitch Fury, kill Tamiyo, then Ancient Dream Chrome Mox, play Fable, and I forced the Fable, and I think I pitched the Consign.
Yeah, funnily enough, I remembered the other way around, that you keep the Consign. So let's see. I can't remember.
Oh, did I? Oh, I don't actually remember. All right, let's speed this up.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, this is because it's just the most important point I wanted to make is that we cannot use pitch a land, so that doesn't tell us much about the rest of their hand. That's just why, that deck is also a lot better. Just imagine that was a mountain, right? Then this play was probably way worse, so this turn 1 was probably way worse than the side of the opponent.
Yeah.
Oh, they don't do anything turn 1. Okay. Oh, they do. Okay.
And they pitched Simian Spirit Guide. Oh, they did Chrome Mox.
So in a vacuum, this is a very good exchange for you. Okay, you didn't click. In a vacuum, this is a very good exchange for you, right? They already mulliganed. But the reality of the situation is, now you have a... Oh yeah, wow. Now press pause, because this is what I find the most interesting about Magic is now you kind of change gears. You went from make them have it to now holding up Consign, which is, yeah, basically, what are we trying to consign here? Let's just start there, I guess.
Well, they kept the 6 and they vomited their hand. So I'm thinking the one way I lose this game is they just go Ancient Tomb Ring or City of Traders Ring. Because I cannot beat a ring. If a ring hits the battlefield, the game is over.
Agree. And then let's try and get into a talk about what's the most likely to... Yeah, that would be the most backbreaking, right? The most backbreaking is that their last 3 cards are combined Soul Ring, Ring, or, land, Spirit Guide Ring. Like, that's the most devastating thing. But it's certainly not the most likely thing. So here you're prioritizing the worst case scenario. You're hedging against worst case scenario, right?
The thing is, it's not even, it's like, it is a worst case scenario, but it's also like they vomited their hand, and I'm like pretty happy that they have no cards left. The only way I lose this game in my eyes, or the only way I like get really behind in this game, is that they just go ring here. And the thing is, they like, it's a 4 of. Every card that we just said is a 4 of. They have 4 rings, 4 ancient tombs. Like, the chance of them having is the same chance of them having anything else, right? Like,
I don't think so. I think it's more likely they have a random red land and another 3-drop. Bombardier, Fable, Blood Moon, Magus. That's way more likely. It's way more likely they have random red land, random 3-drop than 2 mana and a ring.
But is it because if they already played an ancient tomb, so I guess maybe the odds of them having another ancient tomb is pretty low. Obviously, they have a lot more red lands than ancient tombs, but also they still have 2 cards left, and they were very happy to vomit their hand. Like, they were very happy to just vomit their hand. So that gave me the reader they might have a ring because they're happy to vomit their hand. Like,
yeah, I think you're kind of overestimating the agency you have with the mono red deck. No matter what your remaining cards are, you make the play the opponent just did. You cannot sit around. You need to play stuff when your blue opponent is tapped out post sideboard because of consign, because of blue blast. So the opponent's play was more or less forced on the previous turn. Waiting doesn't do them any good. I'm just mainly saying that that is not an argument for them having ring. It would be better for them if they had ring in the back pocket, but it's not something that would alter their play. They would arrive at that Fable play regardless.
Okay. That makes sense. The other thing too is Tamiyo. Like, if they play Broadside here off of Chrome Mox, they can actually, no, they wouldn't be able to kill Tamiyo. So I guess maybe we should have played Tamiyo here. So, but do you want to talk about what you would have done turn 1?
Yeah, let's do that. Maybe it was kind of we did talk a little bit about this back and forth. So maybe we should spell it out on video here for sure. So. The biggest reason that I want to go here is I want to hedge against my opponent's turn 1 play. And I'm pretty confident I can find, let's say let's say they don't do anything. Do you have a Surveil land in your deck, by the way?
I do.
Then, do you have Hedge Mace?
I have Undercity Sewers.
Okay, so that's kind of off the table. I would just be happy that the Tamiyo is my force fodder until further notice, and I just 1-for-1 the deck twice with Consign and Blue Blast, maybe even 3 times with Abrupt Decay, and then I feel like in the mid game we will have breathing room to play that Tamiyo if given the room. So yeah, my play is just very focused on getting my 1-for-1s in, getting their hands smaller, drawing out the game a little bit, and then hopefully my deck can kind of take over. I'm very scared of the turn 1 play that I have to force a will, because then I have to make a random choice on which blue card to keep, and that can backfire in a couple of ways. So I think you kind of pinned yourself into a corner where you make this decision, then you pitch the Blue Blast, then you draw Tamiyo, and then you have to hold up Consign for the nut draw out of the opponent. You feel like you can't allow yourself to lose to that 1 ring, so thus you slow play the second Tamiyo, and then we just end up in a way where you're kind of playing a little bit 1 step from behind, and you're just waiting to, in my opinion, lose to like the red cards out of the deck, like the Fable and the Bombardiers and the Pyroglyphs of the world. So it's a lot to do with getting mileage out of your cards, taking your medicine, and then it's so tough because let's say that Tamiyo is a, Ponder. then you just play a land and pass the turn, right?
Yeah, then I just play a land and pass.
It's just it's very tempting because when you play decks like this, you are, as a player, interested in getting your value. It feels good, right? Crack a clue. I'm up on cards, baby. Let's go. Like, that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
And this could be a case where you have to go off of that path and simply just say, slow and steady wins the race here. This hasn't anything to do with value. This has to do with weathering the storm, the majority of games. So I'm going to do that. Good luck, opponent, playing through Consign, Blue Blast, Force, while, we trade draw steps and I'm a blue deck and you're not. So that's probably fine for me. So that's kind of my philosophy here.
That makes sense. Because the other thing too is because this isn't a dual land, because this is the only other land I have, I'm also scared if I play Tamiyo on turn 2, I also can't hold up Blue Blast. So part of it is like the safest part is when I hit right now on turn 1 after they took a mulligan, where they might have a slower
that is the cost
start
of my play. A cost of my play is you're going to probably waste some mana. You get a little bit punished by, let's say, red tap land go here, then you look like, I wish I played the Tamiyo. But you just kind of have to realize that, okay, but we still have, the 1-for-1s lined up to prolong the game, and we are likely to see another blue land, and if we don't, it's our force fodder, and we get closer to whatever you have in your deck, Baragoi for a troll, or whatever I can't remember. This also has to do with, I can't remember the list in full, but I would have confidence that the draw go is a small advantage to you here.
So, alright, so let's keep going.
So basically, let's get to a little bit back here maybe, or let's go to you not playing. Yeah, this is fine. We can, but I guess the opponent takes forever from here. So you force there, then you play at your second Tamiyo. No, you don't. I'm sorry, you slow roll your second Tamiyo.
Then they play broadside here
because you want to play around the ring, which is I agree that card would devastate you. Oh wow,
nice.
Yeah, you get stone rained here. Yeah, so this is actually something that is not something I'm going to tell you. Oh yeah, you should have thought about this, but it is an actual thing, right? With you
fetching basics.
Yeah, with you fetching your basics, and obviously this is just that is mainly just to say that the red 3-drops that card is technically in that pile of red 3-drops that you left yourself open to. So let's just, for the sake of argument, imagine that those were, the Bombardiers and the Fables of the world, right? Like, those 3-drops were way more likely to get cast than the 4-drop. So sometime you kind of have to go, if they have the ring, I'll just shake their hand and it's fine. But I need to, develop my game plan here. So funnily enough, I would have slow rolled the first Tamiyo, I would have played the second one, funnily enough.
Yeah,
it's interesting how that pendulum works, right? Because all of the thoughts that I have turn 1, you all of a sudden have those turn 2, and you don't play it. And then both kind of end up poorly for you here, which is not a proof at all. So that's why I'm trying to lean on the theory and the understanding.
Obviously, you should play around Sunring Eruption, but I usually don't play around it too much. And here I just look for a land. I think I whiff on Brainstorm, and then I just concede. Yeah,
and obviously you got the most punished possible. So in theory here, the opponent having Sundering Eruption and the mana to cast it is more likely than the ring, because 3 mana versus 4 mana, funnily enough. So let's say you actually cared about what's most likely, then it is slightly more likely you're getting Sundering Erupted, which is, I don't know, something to think about at least. That I agree with you, a lot of players don't, because it's not like normally how the deck plays out, but it is something you can do with the dual lands there, or the, what do you call it, double faced
modal. The MDFCs.
Yeah, that's pretty brutal that you can.
It's
just
a little silly too that card exists, but it
does.
It's
super sick that you have to worry about a freaking what would have been a mountain a year ago.
Yeah, I would personally say that's super sick. I think MDFCs are a mistake. Like, that's why Oops is the dominant that it is because they just keep printing these MDFCs.
There's something about once you go to the critical mass of having like 8 or 12 in the same color, then it can become a bit silly, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's Oops, right? Oops skyrocketed tier 1 because they don't need to run Chrome Box anymore, and we'll see. But I don't want to complain about Wizards design making. I mean, there's a lot of problems with Modern Horizons, but it doesn't matter, right? My thoughts on it don't matter. What does matter is the card exists and I have to play around it.
to maneuver that swamp of whatever is legal in the format. Sometimes it's Psychic Frog and Vexing Bauble, and sometimes it's getting Stone Rained out of the game after playing around Blood Moon carefully.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know, like, so obviously I got giga punished for getting my basics by Sundering Eruption. Would that have changed the game dramatically? Like, yes, because then they Blood Mooned me. And if they didn't Blood Moon me, I actually had all the lands I needed to fight back there, because I would have been able to Abrupt Decay the broadside. So obviously, yeah. I think in hindsight, like, playing the opening ourselves up to being able to get a tropical island so that we can turn on, because if we don't do anything turn one and they go Ancient Tomb Chalice pass, and I just on my turn fetch tropical island and then get swamp, I don't even need to do anything. I could literally just hold up everything still and pass. So, like, let's say they go Chalice, I can just play Swamp and pass, because I already have an answer now to this Chalice in my Abrupt Decay. And if they go for, I guess they go for Blood Moon next, then then we have Force of Will.
Yeah, exactly. Then the Tameo becomes your force fodder, because then your plan is to force the next thing. Then your plan is to Abrupt Decay the Chalice of the Void, and then you have both Consign and Blue Blast, which means you have everything covered, and that will buy you time. So going back to a theme we talked about last week was basically the time walks. I remember you asked me about, what do you mean by the time walks? That's basically how I view the game when I randomly wasteland an opponent, when I play like this against Mono Red. It's because I'm interested in trading draw steps. And if you kind of think based on experience, based on your like what's usually going on in the matchup, I would favor the blue deck when there's no Chalice or Blood Moon in play with the draw steps, right?
Yeah.
Like, just have cantrip, they can flood easier than
they're gonna draw Chrome Moxes and Spirit Guides. Like, they have a lot of dead cards.
Yeah, exactly.
I have so little dead cards in the deck. Like, once we get to turn 3 or 4 on, my average draw is significantly better than theirs. Like, I'm drawing into Barrow-goyfs, like every single thing. Barrow-goyf, Grist, even another Forcible, another Blue Blast, another Tameo, even Bowmaster. I mean, I took Bowmasters out game 2, but, like, I draw any removal spell and I blank half their deck. And then as soon as they draw something that's not a threat, which is pretty likely, I'm now turbo up on cards, because now I have 2 answers and they're drawing dead. Like for instance, like, you know, I've played against, I don't know, Che Maitinho and all the other Mono Red players 100 times, and, you know, and the games where I win are the games where they're like top decking and I'm top decking, and their top deck is Simian Spirit Guide and my top decks are Grist into Barrow-goyf. Like, the game is over.
Yeah, so with that understanding, which I 100% agree with, you should be seeking to, how can I stall out the game? That's just a way. What you just described is that you're getting time walks from stalling out the game. So that is just an argument of where your philosophy, your experience, how you see the decks play out against each other. If you simulate that 100 times, you have identified that that's how you win often. That's how you come out in an advantageous position. So how can you make that happen? So I feel like if you had that, like, dialed in mindset when playing the match, I think you would have just played land pass and said, come at me, bro. I have everything covered with this hand, and I'm not, scared to sit here for the next 10 turns, because that's going to be very good for me on average.
Yeah.
So
because if they go turn 1 Ancient Tomb Simian Spirit Guide and turn 1 Ancient Tomb Simian Spirit Guide Fable, and I just go Blue Blast, like, I'm super up on cards there.
Yeah, and then you just, again, the Tameo, let's imagine it's a Ponder. It's something that it's so tempting, because get the ball rolling with Tameo.
Oh, Ponder, I never do turn 1 anymore. That one I hate Ponder. I only Ponder when I need to at this point. But yeah, I get your point.
Yeah, and the point about that is basically that it's like the danger of getting something going here versus just bread and butter, lean on your experience and understanding of the matchup. You just told me, like a blueprint, you just coached me on what happens when you play longer games with your kind of, mid-range blue deck against Mono Red, and you nailed it. So I feel like if you applied that in the situation, you would have been way better off. It's a slight tiebreaker that the opponent mulligans to 6, because then they're less likely to have, like, back-to-back-to-back threat, which is one of the best ways to punish this, holding up a blue card going 1-for-1. And it's not even punishing, but is there a way to stay competitive through that? That kind of goes down a little bit with the mulligan, so it's even one more argument for going down that path. And I totally agree with you. You keep the flexibility of what to do with your delta. Maybe you have to unlock your decay, but that's fine because you kill the Chalice of the Void. So whether to play around Blood Moon or not, you actually also, funnily enough, play around the Sundering Eruption by playing like that, slightly better. True. Which is just a funny thing that I did not think about at the moment, but it's something we should add to our arsenal, because the Stone Rain mode is very annoying to lose to if you can avoid it. So all in all, I think we've talked a little bit about this before, that your theoretical understanding is very, very strong. You've played Legacy a lot. You have played so much that you have so much in your, let's say, your archive of experience. So you kind of have to put that into play. Even though I know you're streaming, you're interacting with people, you're had a long days of work. That's like the, what do you call that? The scenario that you're in, which makes it difficult. Excuse me.
And to that point, right? Like Magic, especially, is a really hard game to play on autopilot, because there's so many there's just so many moving factors at any given time that it's it's not it's definitely one of the worst games to play in a serious sense when you're not in top of mind, just because. And I'm also, and I do realize, I'm not playing a meta deck, I'm playing my own brew. I don't have the sheer power level of what I'm doing over my opponents to help me get through a hump. My mistakes are punished a lot more just because my card quality is not as high.
Yeah. This is a good point. So you're more forced to, get closer to perfection, if that makes sense, when it comes to your moves, right? Because your deck is most likely not going to carry you against an S tier deck.
No, I made this joke. I was playing Nadu the other day, and I was making misplay after misplay after misplay, and it just didn't matter because as soon as I just drew Nadu and Nomads, I'm like, oh, the game's over.
Yeah, and there's a lot within the good decks. When you think about it, when you play a good deck, what's that these days? It's like Dimir Reanimator, Mono Red is Delver. Yeah. I will say with Delver, if you keep making suboptimal plays, you're probably not going to do that well with neither Dimir, Tempo, nor Delver. Yeah. But I get your point. A good deck has room for small suboptimal stuff here and there, and it's I tripped over my shoelaces, but it doesn't matter. I drew the Rawside Bombardier. That's definitely something that happened to me as well when I played Mono Red. I didn't play perfectly. I sequenced, I don't know, slightly suboptimally at some point, but I just drew, back-to-back Pyrogoyf and just won the game. And that's just part of Magic, right? So that's when I talked about last time was we need to be in a mindset where we allow ourselves to learn. So if I wasn't that, I would just be oh, whoa, Mono Red is just so sick, I'm the best. But in reality, we should strive for perfection. Could I have done this even better? Sometimes I tell people, jokingly, kind of to get their attention, that how could you have won this game even more? And then they're like, there's no such thing as winning is winning. But I'm like, okay, but do you know what I'm saying? How could we have shut the door on the opponent rather than having to get lucky or playing with fire? So it's basically
how can we beat them into submission?
Yeah, which is we don't get extra points for that necessarily, but we do get the benefit of having good habits, the benefit of, I've seen this situation or similar before, now it's in the top of my toolbox so I can apply it again under pressure at 2 a.m. playing for top 8, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
We need to continue to build the good habits so we can pull it out in the clutch.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? It's because I know we wanted to talk about this in the next session, but the topic, what do I want to accomplish? I'll be honest, when I'm streaming, I only want to accomplish entertaining content. I think at the end of the day, I'd rather be someone that people have fun watching than hyper moto grind set. Only because there's a million other people that have that. But I think, I don't know, I just want it to be more fun. But obviously I don't want to make egregious misplays. But to answer your question, when I go to a big tournament, like an Eternal Weekend or a 10K or a 5K or whatever, my goal is to make as little misplays as possible. Because when I lose a game because I bricked or I drew poorly or I got a land when they didn't, I don't feel nearly as bad. Like, in fact, I feel like almost cathartic. Like, you know what? I gave it my best. In the end of the day, my two draws were Fetchland Stifle, and theirs were Frog Frog, which happened at Eternal Weekend. And like they drew Plow into Frog Frog after I landed Dreadnought when they were Hellbent, and then they hit, and then I just drew like all blanks, like Frog.
Yeah.
I drew like Land Stifle Daze.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it's like,
this is a good mindset, and I appreciate it.
and I can't. But when I make a misplay, that's when I'm like really upset with myself. Like obviously everyone makes misplays every day. It's a game, and like especially when you're in a 9-10 round tournament in one day, like when you're playing 9 rounds in one day, like everyone's gonna
Yeah.
make some misplays. It's just, you know, how bad were the misplays, and when did it come up? Did it not? Sometimes you get lucky and it doesn't come up that you misplayed, and sometimes sometimes the misplay just wasn't that big of a misplay, right? Like, oh, you used the Misty Rain Forest to fetch instead of the Flooded Strand, so now you can't get basic planes. And it didn't matter because they didn't have the punish or whatever, or like it just didn't matter. But stuff like that is fine. But like definitely like when I go into a game and I make like a really big mistake, or if I miss lethal, that's when I'm really mad. Because
Yeah.
I'm mad at myself.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think we should have that on the topic for next time,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I talk a lot about having like a good language when it comes to Magic. So, for instance, I want to dig into what you put into the word misplay. And then I will add a ton of nuance to that one, because it's all about kind of training our mind to have different tracks. If this happens, we kind of activate this. If that happens, we activate that. And I will say that you're kind of putting yourself at a disadvantage by having, more. So I always play to win. I always play to like try and optimize. So let's say I have 2 lines I can go for. You would probably go for the most flashy one that's the most fun on camera. Let's say you have a 52 versus 48% line. You would
Yeah.
probably go for the fun one if it's the 48 one.
I've definitely
Because you're. So that's just
Yeah.
to say that is the opposite of training your brain to be, having discipline and stuff like that. So you're at an even bigger challenge. You play off metagame decks, and you make content where entertainment is the number one priority, and you also want to improve to be a stone cold killer at important tournaments. So I'm basically trying to say that you're trying to master more than one instrument here, but that just makes the challenge more fun, right? More complicated, and that's
yeah.
that's never bad.
And to that point too, it's worth noting that I put, when I was like, for instance, the Stifle Knot list that I had built for Eternal Weekend, that deck was my baby, and to see, I almost got top 8 with it, and then Bosch and Roll got top 8 with it, and that felt really good. And I will say that I put an absurd amount of time in that deck, and the thing is though, I don't really have motivation to put a lot of time into building a deck that I like, into getting better, right? Into like getting better at a specific archetype and practicing for the sake of getting objectively better in a metagame, is because there isn't any tournaments coming up, right? Like there's no big legacy events, for at least by me. There's like, we have the NRG series, but even they've been scrapping legacy a lot recently, to the point
Right.
where it's like the only big tournaments I have are like challenges and leagues and prelims. And challenges, as you know, it's really hard for me to sit down for 8 hours. Like I can put 4 hours into Magic every single night, and I have been because of my work schedule, but I can't do more than like 3 to 4 hours because I have to go to bed. And the other thing is, challenges happen at very specific times, and they're like 6 to 8 hour ordeals. So it's really hard for me to play in challenges. So when I do play in a challenge, it's nice, but it's but anyway, we can talk about this all next time, because I think that's like an interesting topic of like how to allocate, how to get better.
Yeah, I agree. It really is. So it's basically to sum up, what we talked about today is basically that the more you kind of you play a lot of games. You probably play more games than I do, but I probably study the game more than you do, right?
Yeah, 100%.
So there's some combination here that you can get inspired by. Let me put it that way, because every time we talk about Magic, I'm very impressed with your, let's say, general understanding of how things work. What's value? What's getting, raced? Who benefits from drawing out the game? Who benefits from shortening down the game? You're on point with so many things, and then you just have to, well, I'm saying just as if it's simple, but you're so close to, if you can apply that one-to-one when you're actually playing and having that oversight, you'll crush. So it's basically just we need to kind of find a way to like motivate you to have good habits when thinking about stuff. I also want to get into next time a little bit about, clock usage, a little bit about when to think about certain stuff ahead of schedule, which is something I'm pretty big on, especially when I play online. We can get into the differences between paper and online when it comes to, in paper, we have to think about slow play. Will a judge be called? Online, we have to think about only our chess clock in theory.
Yeah.
So how do we kind of manage that? And I think there's something to find there when it comes to just getting in some good habits of what do you think about during your turn? What do you think about during the opponent's turn? Where's the game going? And we kind of navigate it like that. I usually say that all of my knowledge about the format and my habits, that's kind of my compass that I'm navigating via, right? And then I kind of see everything through that lens. And you have those pair of glasses. We just need to put it on more often.
It's funny because like one of the things I did at Eternal Weekend when I had my really deep run was I slowed down a lot. Like I thought a lot. And there's some more stuff that I could talk to you about later, but I was able to slow down my thinking a ton in a good way, and I really sat and I thought about my plays, because the biggest reason for when I misplay is I don't think enough. If you watch my stream for any amount of time, you could not count on your hands and feet combined how many times I make a play, then immediately realize, oh, that was a misplay. Like within one priority action, within like 2 seconds, within like 3 seconds of me pressing OK, I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Like I played a game against Delver where they had Mishra's Bauble and it was trigger on the stack, and I had Bowmaster, and I was like, oh yeah, I should probably like. I just pressed 1 immediately and then realized, oh, I needed to flash in Bowmasters here so they didn't get the draw, so they couldn't have Force of Will. Then they got Force of Will without 5 mana, and that made it so that I couldn't actually kill their Delver.
Those decisions are also just the fact that you realize that that's something you can improve on is like the first big step, because a lot of Magic players will make, now you're saying misplace. I'll challenge that word next time. So let's just use it today for the sake of argument. The misplace, it's basically they're exposing themselves to risk. Right?
Yeah.
If you sleep at the wheel, you allow something to happen. How can we minimize that? That's kind of I want to eliminate as much as possible. You talked about the Doomsday pile 1 or 2 times ago. I can't remember if it was the first or second session, and that was like the pinnacle of how many boxes can I check? How much stuff can I eliminate when it comes to chance? So we basically have to apply that mindset as often as possible. We have to time it like this so my opponent doesn't have the exact card at this time, because then we come into how brutal would it be if they actually have it. Not how likely is it that my opponent's last card is this, but if we can play around that, then that chance is 0 instead of 1% or 2% or 3%, right? So we just have to build like good habits of play around. Yeah, I don't care if it's a 1 of or a 0 of that, but if you can respect the card by timing your spells differently, we should do it, because it's a good habit for when it's gonna be important against whatever the case is in the future. We have to believe that our choices impact our win rate, and that should be like the motivation in itself.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point, right? Like and that kind of goes back to the topic of why didn't I play Tamiyo on turn 2, and I was scared of Consign when I wanted to hold up Consign, and it was like, well, the chance of them having the ring. One, I think there's a few cards in Magic the Gathering that I overplay around because I've been scarred. The 3 most notable are Teferi, Time Raveler, Blood Moon, and the One Ring. Yeah. Because I realize it's like an emotional thing. It's not logical, but the amount of games I've lost that I thought were unlosable because they had Teferi, or because they had One Ring, or because they had Blood Moon is just out of this world. And so I'm like, and I definitely overplay around those cards because of how brutal they are against this. Like Blood Moon is the decks I play in Modern were Goryo's and Omnath. What's the best card against both those decks? Goryo's has like the most atrocious. Goryo's is the most atrocious mana base on the planet. My bug deck has the most atrocious mana base on the planet. And
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
That let me just try and say this from the other perspective. So whenever I play, I care a lot about what happened game one, because a match, in my opinion, is like a story or a book you're reading through. It's some kind of narrative, right?
Hmm.
And since Magic is an emotional game, what happened in game one will be impacting what players do moving forward. So if there's a close decision, players don't want like the same thing to happen twice. So for you, that context is your history of deck choices versus the field. Who has been the boogeyman? Who has rained on your parade? Which cards, have been devastating against you history-wise? So at least you acknowledge that you're giving up equity here and now
Yeah.
because of that. So in a perfect world, we need to be the ones taking advantage of that. We need our opponent to think, I can't lose to that card again. I'll make this play, this play instead of that play. And that's something we can use to our advantage. And that's especially true when you play decks like Stompy, where it's like, I got Blood Moon turn one. I'm not like game one. I'm not going to let that happen again. And then you can capitalize that by playing differently. I won some games this weekend where my opponent were too scared, and that's the thing about the red deck is if they're too scared, you can take advantage. If they sleep at the wheel, you can pounce and punish them also, right? So they need to get it right, so to speak. And I think your game was actually a good example of you, quote unquote, getting it wrong twice and the opponent capitalizing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's basically so whether that was emotional or based on, data, experience, who knows? But there's an argument to be made that you misevaluated twice that game, and the opponent just got free value from you, overthinking a few situations. And yeah, that's just good to be conscious about and try and separate the what is more likely to happen, what would be the worst case scenario, what happened last time I played against the deck, and just kind of be in a headspace where that doesn't really matter. Like we're
Yeah.
not scared of, we're not scared of calling a bluff because we lost by doing that yesterday, or like we need to eliminate that from the equation basically in a perfect world.
Yeah. And I think like I realize now, saying it out loud, it's a very like almost childish in nature way to go about it, and it's definitely like a very like anti-progressive thing is to use previous games as any indicator. Like obviously, if you're playing as mono red versus mono red, those decks ultimately you could have minor variations, but they're going to be like 99% the same deck. Like
Yeah.
regardless of what maybe the specific threat counts are, it's still the same deck. Like you're losing the same way regardless. You're never losing a different way to mono red. At least in the decks that I play, I'm never losing in a different way to mono red. I'm always losing because they have lock piece, threat, bring. And if I can stop like two of those three, I win every time. But I need to be able to
Yeah.
stop two of those three.
Yeah.
Um, and and you playing so hard. I mean, obviously the mono red game isn't the greatest example because double Sundering Eruption is not something that's on my radar because it doesn't come up that often.
Yeah.
It truly doesn't. Especially with like such a land, especially with that deck, for me to only have two lands and then miss a land drop is extremely rare. Because I have like 24 lands effective. I have like 20 lands and then the Lorien Revealed and the Trolls. Um,
Sure.
so that was kind of like a different case. But overall, to your point, right? Like I have to not be so emotional about those cards. When not like emotion like I'm crying, but like emotion like
Yeah.
making logical decisions
Yeah.
because
When it comes to your
yeah,
judgment, yeah,
yeah,
that's
like
just
emotional judging calls. And like
yeah. That
like playing around Ring was an emotional judgment call that paid off extremely poorly.
it was like not likely to happen. Sometimes you can allow yourself to play around the nuts. Sometimes you can't. And I feel like this was a scenario where you could not afford it, because you're not progressing at that point. You depleted your hand. You're yeah, you basically pinned yourself in a corner there with keeping the consign, but pitching the blast. You could even argue you should have done it the other way around with where our conversation has been going, right?
Yeah,
Um, and then we need to cover some red card instead of a colorless card at that point. But it's very very complicated, and it takes a lot of practice, a lot of discipline, and a lot of. I actually was very conscious of this weekend when I played Mono Red, where it's like, well, I play against Doomsday, and if my opponent has the Force Tool, I can't win, so I'll just make my best play, and then it's kind of simple because I'm accepting my fate. I know I cannot
yeah,
beat a certain card, so it's just fine. I make the other play. I make the optimal play that doesn't care about the Force Tool. And maybe there's something to apply to normal decks as well. I felt very, very relaxed just saying, okay, my hand can only do this. Let's see if it's good enough.
Yeah, and that's a good point, right? It's like, so I used to play Hearthstone competitively. Part of the reason I played Hearthstone, part of the reason I started playing Magic games is because they essentially got rid of the Hearthstone competitive scene. It doesn't really exist anymore. At least it's like a shell of what it was. I
Right.
played both Constructed and Battlegrounds a lot, and in both those games, in Battlegrounds, it's a little bit less because it's not a binary state. The outcome isn't binary because it's an eight-person lobby with like placements. But in Constructed, when I played, and I played at a very, very high level, like we're talking like top 10 NA everything. Um, and one of the key things when I was helping people get better at the game was playing. It's not exactly as cut and dry in Magic as it is in Hearthstone, but playing to not lose is just delaying the loss.
Right.
And it sounds
So,
really weird to say that, but I think you get what I mean by saying that. Playing to not lose is just delaying the loss. Sometimes you just have to play to win and hope they don't have it.
yeah, so that will also come up in Magic, I feel like, where people are more comfortable saying, I'll do this to delay, but they didn't kind of finish the sentence and saying, so that I can do this 2 or 3 turns from now. They kind of missed that point, but they delayed the game. That's totally fair. But they could have gone for the throat. So despite that being maybe a, I don't know, 10% chance, then they
Yeah.
decide they would rather play a longer game where they have a 5% chance, which doesn't make sense inevitably.
Yeah, and obviously like, Hearthstone's very different because like the hand reading in Hearthstone is a huge skill because in Hearthstone you actually see what turn they drew the card and you can see how long it's been sitting in their hand.
Oh, wow.
So you can like a lot of Hearthstone is hand reading correctly. Like you'll even have add-ons that like tell you they drew this card on turn 4 and it's been in their hand the last 5 turns. And if you haven't played a threat, you can pretty safely surmise that they have some kind of removal. So like the hand reading in Hearthstone is a much larger technical skill because you have all that information in front of you when they drew it, how long they've had it. In Magic, obviously that skill doesn't exist. So the concept of trying to get hand reads and trying to play around what they could and could not have is very different. Like it's a totally different dynamic. But I think that same kind of premise
Yeah, and that's
exists in
something
Magic.
we can also get into actually at a later point because
Hand
that's
reading,
something
yeah,
I feel like I'm very very good at that. And the way I talk about it is basically I'm painting a picture. What kind of story am I telling the opponent? What kind of story are they telling me? So I would sometimes go like, it makes a lot of sense for the opponent to have a certain card at this point. And then on the other hand, be like, well, last turn they didn't have this because then they would have cast it. And then I kind of add all of that information together and maybe arrive at a conclusion. So there's a lot about picking up on what the opponent is trying to tell me and also trying to manipulate the opponent with what we're trying to tell them to make them go into door B instead of door A if that's what we prefer. So how can we manipulate? That's actually kind of an expansion of the Thoughtseize discussion
that's
that
what I was
we
going
had
to
last
say.
time.
What could be cool is if we did a series of games, not for the purpose of like playing out games, but for the purpose of like we do a series of games over the course of like maybe an hour, like 30 minutes or something, and then we kind of discuss and we try to predict what was in the other person's hand by turn 3 or turn 4 based on what happened in the previous 3 turns. That's an exercise I used to do in Hearthstone a lot, and I haven't done it in Magic, but I feel like that could be cool to do in Magic too.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, because at the end of the day, it's going to help you to realize, is this threat going to stick? Am I playing this or that? Um, and that's basically why we want to do our homework in Magic. It's because then when we have a very close decision, we know which way to lean, so it doesn't just get, random, for the lack of a better word. We,
Yeah.
we need to qualify our decisions as much as possible because we believe that will leave us in a better place than if we just, oh, close decision, roll dice, let's go. Like, we need
Yeah.
to get the small decisions correct more often than our opponent. That's kind of the goal of studying the game.
Right. I mean, I know we're like 10 minutes over, so I know you've probably got a busy day ahead of you, but I just want to say like, no, this is helpful. I'm glad we got to talk about those plays. I definitely like, if anything, I definitely like a lot of what we talk about is interesting because like it's stuff that I kind of know deep down just from playing as much as I do.
Yeah.
But it's not stuff that I've internalized or verbalized as much. Like the Thoughtseize thing has helped me a ton. And I've been thinking about that consciously a lot more now. Like, what does my Thoughtseize tell them about my hand? Can I bluff by what I
Yeah.
take. Obviously, that
Yeah.
doesn't work against like players that are newer to the game, but like if I'm playing against someone like I don't know, like Rude Slay's in the chat right now. Like if I'm playing against like Rude Slay, who's like pretty much in every top 8 on Moto and on the challenges, if I thought sees him, I know he's going to be thinking about what I took on the thought sees, and I can
Yep.
use that to like almost like to try to like play this game between like, can I make a bluff because I know my opponent is good and they're going
Yeah.
to assume that I took this for a purpose or something like you bring up the
Yeah.
days play, the days barrel
Yeah.
goif play a lot.
Yeah. It's just when you add that extra layer to your Thoughtseize, it goes from like an average card to a great card. I remember when Grief got banned, and I have to like rebuild Blue Black Reanimator. I was one of the first players to put 3 Thoughtseizes in the deck, and I was just like, every time I draw Thoughtseize, I'm doing well. I'm able to shape the game, manipulate some outcomes, shape my game plan, make them second guess things. It just had more value than the 1-for-1. And I think that's basically, so like half a year ago, 9 months ago, I basically started learning the value of that card when you know what you're doing. And then I mainly play on the challenges against people who also know what they're doing. So I guess that makes the arena where I'm bringing that weapon, also, that makes it more potent as well, right? Let's say I was playing at my local game store or teaching my kid how to play Legacy, then Thoughtseize would not be, the best card in my deck. So it also has to do with who you're battling against.
Yeah, 100%. And there's definitely something to be said about like kind of being on that next level too. Like I don't know if I told you the story of, I had a friend of mine always told me that when you're playing Delver and you're playing against combo, always keep your ponder, never shuffle.
You mentioned this as a good example of they don't know. So if you can deliver something with your best acting abilities, then you're better off. And again, it comes to the time walks. If you can make your opponent bet up for one more turn instead of going for it, that's like the goal of the theatrics or the narrative you're trying to tell your opponent. So it's awesome that stuff. Whenever I mention some topics, it's not like you're like, oh, I've never heard about that before. You always have some experience. So basically, you have the experience. You don't have the, let's say, you haven't read the whole book, but you have experienced it tons of times, right? So it's like, that makes sense. That's why. So we're in this process of you putting those pieces together. So you have both your instinct, but also the kind of philosophy that instinct is built on. So we're trying to make you the holistic crusher.
Yeah, the holistic crusher. I like that.
It's basically just to say that you can play a ton of games, but if you also have the theory to back it up, then the sky's the limit.
Yeah. I think so next week we were going to talk about kind of like the mindset. We're going to talk about like clock management and Moto and like paper versus, and I know we talked about it a little bit, but I can definitely give some more insight there about just the how I feel like I make a lot of misplays and immediately realize I made the misplay.
Yeah, that's a good one. The misplays.
And I know you don't like to use that word.
Well, let's see, because I mean, at the end of the day, it's just words. But sometimes having a different differentiation. I can't even say that word. What's the word I'm looking for?
Having a different.
Yeah, let's just go with that one. English is not my first language, so having the nuances of the different words can kind of help you understand what's a misplay, what's a judgment call, what's an oversight, what's a misclick. Different words for different things that sometimes is important to also for your self-understanding. Oh, you didn't make a misplay, but you accidentally clicked your freaking keyboard. Like that's not a strategical decision. That's a maneuvering mistake or whatever you want to call it, right? So all of that stuff we can kind of qualify next time and get into some habits. And I can kind of chime in because I have experience with both, thinking about something, playing super fast, so I have 10 minutes to make my doomsday pile in the clutch, but also just, slow and steady, the pros and cons of different ways of approaching the management. And also, I have to stay true to the fact that you want to make content that is not something people fall asleep to. So lots of moving parts there.
The stream stuff is like less important, right? Like that's something I do for fun. Obviously it does I do get mad like when I make misplays on stream, especially if I get like a ton of viewers random. Like sometimes I'll randomly get up to like a good amount of viewers, like no raid, and I'm just like, oh god, now I actually have to play well. And it's like the regulars know that they're not coming here for pristine gameplay, but I don't want to make pretty egregious misplays, and so I usually try to limit that, especially because I am playing decks where misplays are punished so badly. Like in bug deck, Uh, when half my cards are 2-for-1s and they're very silver bullet answers that answer things very well, if I like make a misplan when I'm using Abrupt Decay versus Fatal Push, especially against like mono red, it can be like backbreaking. So stuff like that, like right, like
Yeah.
I'm not playing decks where I can just kind of usually just coast my way to a win.
Yeah, and that just makes the mountain that much higher and the challenge that much more fun. So I'm definitely up for that challenge. Yeah, I think that brings us to the end of
Yeah,
today's session. I think it was awesome as usual. I think the combination of having some visual stuff to talk about and then just folding out those topics, your experiences, my experiences, um, and then just getting closer to having fun with the theory side of the game. And whenever I have these sessions, the first thing I want to do is just go and play Magic, which is probably a good sign. It's just, yeah, it just motivates me a lot.
no, I don't know if I'll have to play any more games today because probably should. I actually have to go to the office tomorrow. I'm gonna be playing a lot of Magic this weekend because you're not coming to MagicCon, right?
No, I'm really minimizing the travel when it comes to Magic. I go to some Eternal weekends, but in general, it's just better for me to roll out of bed and do what I like to do on the computer, and then have little bit more free time on my hands. But yeah, I traveled a lot in the past.
Because you have a family, right? You have
Yeah,
you have a wife and kids and all that. Yeah,
yeah,
I get it.
yeah, exactly. So at that point, resources. Speaking of, yeah, that becomes something you want to prioritize.
That makes sense. Well, shoot, I'm sad I won't be able to see you this weekend, but hopefully I'll be able to see you at one of these events one of these days.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. I'll definitely be traveling to the U.S. in the future. I have a few friends over there that I need to see in person from time to time. So
nice. Yeah,
definitely.
if you're ever in Chicago, definitely let me know.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've only been in like on a layover. I've never actually been in the city and stuff. So
That's
yeah, that
cool.
would be awesome.
Just don't come in the winter. Don't be like Wizards of the Coast because I don't know if you noticed, but it's like -15 right now. So
Yeah, it's then I might as well stay at home.
it's funny seeing all the Europeans that are here for the Pro Tour posting like, because last year it was an anomaly. Last year it was like 45, 50 in February, which is out
Mhm.
of control. It's like may as well be summer, like the heat of summer. Um, but seeing
Yeah.
everyone here know what it's really like in February, and they're posting their Google weather, and it's like, yeah, I'm not leaving the house. It's like people are asking, oh, did you see the city? And maybe it was Manguchi. He posts his like Google weather, it's -17. It's like, no, I didn't leave the house. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds about right for Chicago in February, dude.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's definitely not ideal. Then I
no,
might as well stay in the cold Scandinavia.
yeah, I have to make it out to the Northern Lights one day. It's one of the things I told myself I'd do before I die, is I'm gonna
Yeah,
go see the Aurora Borealis. Um,
yeah, that's amazing.
but anywho, all right, I gotta get ready. I gotta go to bed. I gotta take a shower. Andreas, I will see you again on Monday. It'll actually be after MagicCon, so I'll have the Legacy Cup to talk about. Um,
Even better. So if something changes in the meantime, we can of course switch up the topics. As I said many times before, this is your session, so let's just see what's going on, and when we have the topics we already agreed on to fall back on, and
yeah,
yeah, see you in a week. It's been
cool.
awesome.
See you in a week. All right, Andreas, have a good day. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.